All right, let's jump right in. Welcome to our explainer on what is easily one of the most sophisticated supply chain cyber heists we've ever seen hit the open source ecosystem. Today, we're unpacking the absolute chaos of May 11th, 2026, when a worm dubbed Mini Shai-Hulud tore through the NPM registry. Look, this wasn't your standard everyday phishing link or a leaked password on a sticky note. This was a highly orchestrated, multi-stage digital heist that completely shattered the walls of some of the most heavily relied upon developer tools on the planet. You know what's really wild about this case? The sheer irony of it all. The primary target here was the TanStack team, and they definitely weren't sloppy. In fact, they did literally everything security experts beg you to do. They had two-factor authentication locked down on all maintainer accounts, they completely ditched long-lived static passwords in favor of short-lived OIDC tokens, and they used cryptographically signed provenance attestations on every single release. On paper, they were an absolute fortress, and yet the attackers still managed to waltz right through, completely bypassing defenses that most people would consider impenetrable. Over 160. That is the massive number of malicious packages dropped across major namespaces in just one single day. We're talking about incredibly popular ecosystems getting hit. TanStack, UiPath, Mistral. To put that scale into perspective for you, just one of those packages, the TanStack React router, gets downloaded over 12 million times a week. The blast radius here was astronomical, putting millions of developer machines and CI pipelines in the crosshairs almost instantly. So, let's look at part one, the setup. Anatomy of the compromise. If you look at this timeline, it's basically a masterclass in meticulous execution. The attacker laid the groundwork with a disguised fork of the repository on May 10th. The very next morning, they shoot over a malicious pull request. Less than an hour later, they've completely poisoned the system's cache. By that evening, 84 malicious TanStack packages are live on the NPM registry. But here's a crazy silver lining. An external researcher, Ashish Kurmi, spotted the compromise in just 20 minutes. Still, this entire thing, from a decoy fork to total compromise and detection, unfolded in just over 24 hours. So how did they do it? The attacker's first masterstroke was leveraging something called an orphaned commit. They pushed this detached commit directly into their disguised fork. Now, because of the way shared object storage works on platforms like GitHub, this meant the malicious payload was technically reachable via the main repository's URL, but it sat completely outside the protected branch rules. It's essentially a ghost file. It bypassed all standard branch protections because technically it was never actually pushed to the main code base's branches. Which brings us to part two, the breach, bridging the trust boundaries. Okay, so how does a detached ghost commit actually hijack a secure system? Well, it doesn't work on its own. The core of this attack required chaining three very specific vulnerabilities together. The attacker had to exploit a workflow, use that access to poison a shared cache, and then use that to extract credentials straight from memory. Let's break down exactly how they hopped across these trust boundaries. First up, they took advantage of a specific GitHub Actions workflow setting known as pull_request_target. Basically, this setting allows code from an untrusted fork to run with much higher privileges, a classic setup for what's known in the industry as a pwn request. By force pushing to their PR over and over, the attacker triggered a bundle-size workflow that ran their orphaned payload. This sneaky little script then wrote a poisoned file directly into the shared PNPM store cache, placing it right where the system would look for it later. Boom, they just crossed their first major trust boundary. And this right here is the absolute climax of the heist. A few hours pass, and a totally legitimate maintainer kicks off a real release workflow. That workflow innocently restores the cache, bringing the poisoned file right along with it. Suddenly, the attacker's malware is running natively inside a trusted, highly privileged release environment. But it gets worse. The malware literally dumps the GitHub runner's memory, scanning the raw RAM to find and extract the short-lived OIDC publish token. It totally bypassed the workflow's secure publish step and just minted its own keys to the kingdom. Now for part three, the getaway and spread, the credential harvesting payload. With 84 compromised packages out in the wild, the worm had to figure out how to infect users without raising alarms. It used an incredibly clever trick during the NPM install phase by hiding inside an optional dependency. It ran a concealed script that immediately ended with an exit1 command. Why would it force a failure? Because failing immediately makes the installation look like a totally harmless, ignorable error for a package you didn't even really need. Meanwhile, the malicious script had already detached itself and was quietly running in the background. Most developers wouldn't suspect a thing. And once it was active on a developer's laptop or a CI server, the blast radius was just staggering. This payload was hungry. It relentlessly hunted down a massive list of credentials. We're talking AWS keys, Kubernetes tokens, HashiCorp Vault access, SSH private keys, you name it. It scoured environment variables and cloud metadata endpoints. It wasn't just satisfied infecting the current machine, it was hoarding these secrets to self-replicate, trying to use those stolen tokens to publish even more malware to any other packages the victim happened to maintain. You're probably wondering, how did they get all this stolen data out without the network admins noticing? For the getaway, this malware was a total ghost. It didn't send the data back to some standard, easily blockable command and control server. Instead, it exfiltrated everything over the session network, which is an end-to-end encrypted peer-to-peer messenger network. On the wire, it just looks like standard encrypted messaging traffic on a normal HTTPS port. That makes network blocking by security teams almost impossible. All right, let's get into part 4, the hard truth, the provenance illusion. Here is the hardest lesson we have to swallow about modern software supply chain security. The defense mechanisms we rely on are truly only as good as their implementation. The core vulnerability of this entire mess came down to OIDC configuration. Because the trust was granted across the entire repository, the attacker's orphaned commit could legally request a publish token the second it sneaked into a workflow. The absolute fix here? You have to strictly pin your OIDC trust, not just to the repository, but to specific protected branches like your main branch, and to specific trusted workflows. And that leads us to the most sobering takeaway of this entire explainer. Every single one of those 84 malicious TanStack packages carried completely valid, cryptographically signed provenance badges from NPM's SigStore infrastructure. The system actually worked exactly as it was designed to. It verified the package came from the TanStack GitHub action. But here's the catch. Provenance only proves where a package was built. It absolutely cannot prove that the underlying build environment wasn't secretly compromised by a memory scraping worm. This heist definitively proved that our favorite security tools, 2FA, short-lived tokens, cryptographic provenance, are only as strong as their narrowest configuration flaw. Literally, one orphaned commit and a shared cache was all it took to unravel the whole shebang. So I'm going to leave you with a question to chew on. What hidden trust boundaries exist in your pipelines right now? Because if this could happen to a team that did almost everything right, how secure is your supply chain, really?